We've been in the book of Ezra, and we're going to be in chapters 4, 5, and 6 today. But I wanted to give us a little reminder of where we're at. In the previous lesson, we talked about Cyrus issuing the decree for the first wave of exiles to go back to Jerusalem to build the temple to their God. Now, what's unique about the Cyrus portion of this? Anybody remember?
He was foretold over 70 years before he even was born.
Over 70 years before he was born, he was foretold that by name. Okay. And well, how does God refer to him in those prophecies?
My servant.
My servant, Cyrus. Was Cyrus a believer?
No.
He's not.
Even though he does not know me.
That's right. That's right. So that's how things get started. We're off to a great start there. And then we talked about how they, first thing they did was they built the altar. Now, why would they do that? Why would the altar be first versus the temple?
God resides.
No.
Well, is honoring.
No.
Forgiveness of sins.
Alvin, why did they start the altar
For
first?
sacrifices, so they could
So they could start the sacrifices, which is necessary to cover the sin. They needed to do the altar first. In fact, we talked about how they went and found the original foundations for the altar and rebuilt the altar as well. This is the best depiction I could get of it. But basically, so you get an idea of the size of this thing. It's about 5 meters tall, okay? 5 meters, which is 10 cubits, and 32 cubits square, which is about 50 feet. It is big. But that's the first thing they wanted to do is get the altar going so they could reinstate the sacrificial system. You think they're looking at that for the third temple? Dan? Absolutely. Dan and I have talked a lot about this. And then we talked about the 7th month. They're back from captivity and 7 months in, and we talked about the importance of that. The reason that's important is because they're in the month of Tishri, the 7th month. Look at the feasts that are coming up that they want to be able to honor, and they have to have the altar in place to be able to do that. So the 7th month was a big thing for them, and they had a tremendous celebration. Okay, you get the altar back, you're out of exile, you have all the priests and the Levites, they're all there. And then they, with one loud voice, when the foundation for that house was laid before their eyes, many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of joy from the sound of weeping of people. Why would there be weeping of the older people? Remember that?
They saw
All right. They saw the destruction, absolutely.
Well, it's so nostalgia. It's just so.
And they would have seen Solomon's temple. Okay, they would have seen Solomon's temple. So this had to be a mixed feelings with the group that's there. You got the younger people that are celebrating the fact that we're getting started with the altar and we've laid the cornerstone for the temple. So mixed feelings there. And then Haggai encourages the builders. We talked about this as well. Jack, you want to go ahead and read that again?
On the 21st of the 7th month, the word of the Lord came by Haggai the prophet, saying, "Speak now to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and to the remnant of the people, saying, who was left among you who saw this temple in its former glory? And how do you see it now? Does it not seem to you like nothing in comparison? But now take courage, Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Take courage also, Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and all you people of the land, take courage, declares the Lord, and work, for I am with you, declares the Lord of armies. As for the promise which I made you when you came out of Egypt, my spirit remains in your midst. Do not fear."
So God is providing some encouragement to him. He had to know that you're going to suffer from the comparison to Solomon's temple. And we talked last week about the dangers of comparing things. And God said, hey, listen, don't do that. This is a different time. We're going to see a better example of that later in this lesson when it comes to sacrifices. The comparing is not a wise thing to do. We also talked about the fact they laid that cornerstone in the second month of the second year. Why was that important?
When Solomon's temple.
Solomon's temple was started in the second month of the year they started building as well. So they're paying attention to those things. Remember, we had that one slide about how they remembered. Netanyahu had that thing about how they remember Cyrus. The Jews have got long memories, okay, and they're well versed. So the coincidence about the seventh month with the month of Tishri, that's not a coincidence. Starting the temple in the second month of the year, not a coincidence. These things are done deliberately. And God tells them to be encouraged. But now take courage, Zerubbabel. Take courage, Joshua. All you people of the land, take courage. 3 different times he's telling them to take courage. And then he also tells them, and work. You're going to see why that's important here in just a second. And he says, for I'm always with you. So take courage is a big thing here. So we're off to a great start. We got the temple, cornerstone laid. We got the altar. We started the sacrificial systems. We're at the end of chapter 3. What could possibly go wrong? Turn to chapter 4. And we'll get started there. All right. Jack, let's start with those verses where we're in chapter 4, 1-3, I believe it is.
Now, when the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the people of the exile were building a temple to the Lord God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of fathers' households and said to them, let us build with you, for like you, we seek your God, and we have been sacrificing to him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us up here. But Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the heads of fathers' households of Israel said to them, you have nothing in common with us in building a house to our God, but we ourselves will together build for the Lord God of Israel, just as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us.
So who are the adversaries? Anybody know? They're most likely Samaritans. And you start to understand when you see what's going to happen here in chapter 4, you start to understand why the Jews have got a long memory on the Samaritans. It makes the parable of Jesus about the Samaritan, it changes just a little bit. As we go through this, I think you'll appreciate that a little more. So these are the adversaries, and they come up and they say to them, hey, why don't you let us help you? When I read that, that's like someone knocking on your door and saying, we're from the government, we're here to help. Okay, that's kind of what that's like, okay? Are they really there to help? Yeah, and these are inhabitants. Keep in mind, 2 generations have gone by of exile, and much of the Jewish population of Judah has been exiled to Babylon. And there's a remnant from the lowest and poorest in the land. In fact, that's covered in Jeremiah 39. He says, but Nebuchadnezzar, the captain of the guard, left in the land of Judah the poor people who had nothing and gave them vineyards in the fields at the same time. So this is not a group of people you're probably going to want to hang out with. But what's the problem here? You don't have a lot of people working on the temple.
Well, the Assyrians had removed all the 10 tribes of Judah, of Israel, from the northern 10 tribes, and they had replaced them with other peoples. And then they intermarried with the people that were left, And so it was kind of a mongrel race.
That's the exact word. That's the exact wording you see in most commentaries. They're viewed by the Jews as kind of mongrels, spiritual mongrels, if you will. Yeah, so they come and they're asking, hey, why don't you let us help? The Samaritans, they continue, we talked about it, they continue all the way into the New Testament. But as Alvin was saying, Israel fell to the Assyrians in 733 BC. Okay, so think about how long they've been out of there. Think about what the land of Jerusalem and Judah must have looked like to the people coming back from Babylon. You had to feel like a stranger in a strange land because this is not what you left. Even though when you left, the temple was burning and so was the city. So it had to be difficult for them. And then the other thing, it says in 2 Kings, it says, they feared the Lord, yet served their own gods according to the rituals of the nations from among whom they were carried away. So having these people there to offer to help, is that a good thing? You remember in the previous lesson, we talked about all the steps they had taken to keep the purity in place. Okay, they wanted to make sure that only the people that were in the bloodlines of priests were working on the temple. Okay, they're not going to let it get screwed up by having these people there, and they know that. They know that as well. We seek your God as you do. Do they? Not really. They probably said this, and they might have even said it with some sincerity. They may have genuinely believed that they sought the same God, and yet they also served other gods. And then they add in here, I thought this was interesting. We have sacrificed to him since the days of Ezra, the king of Assyria. Is that possible? Is it possible that they did sacrifices?
After the nation was resupplied with people out of Assyria, they had problems because the lions and other animals were destroying the people. So they complained to the king of Assyria, and the king of Assyria said, well, let me send you a priest who will know the God of Israel. But remember that the priests in the northern 10 tribes were people from anything but the Levites. They wouldn't let the Levites serve as priests. And so anybody who would come with the necessary sacrifice, they were priests.
They were doing it outside of the temple and outside of the priesthood.
That's right. And so the priests that they brought in would be likely priests that had actually served the 2 calves that had been made by Jeroboam.
And Zerubbabel and Joshua, they would have known this. They would have known that this was nonsense they were speaking. You didn't really sacrifice to our God. And then Zerubbabel and Joshua and the rest of the heads of the father, they said to them, and their response is important because it's unified. What did they tell them? They basically told them to get lost. Get out of here. We don't need you. We will take care of this, just as King Cyrus had ordered. So with one voice, they refused to help the Samaritan, or let the Samaritans help them. It's important. I think it's an important step of faith for them as well, that they become united in this. I think the fact that you've got these people that are confronting you is probably a good thing as far as uniting the people that are there within the priesthood. But it's very easy in a weak or early circumstances of building to do things that you maybe ought not to do. You think they were tempted to get these people to help them? Doesn't sound like it, but I think there might have been some temptation there. Yeah, I remember I was working for Samtec early on. I was in the pricing department. We were a $20 million company at the time, and I'm working on a giant quote for Honeywell, and it's worth $20 million. Now, I'm a salesman at heart. I see a $20 million opportunity, I'm going to go for it. So I go to the owner of the company, Sam Shine. I said, got this quote from Honeywell for $20 million. How do you want to quote it? He goes, you tell them that we'll take $1 million worth of business. We don't want the rest. And I'm just a young kid. I'm like, well, why would you do that? 20 million, we could double the size of the company with one order. We could finish the temple a whole lot earlier. And we went back and told them that, and they walked away. Why would they walk away?
The company.
Exactly. That's exactly what Sam Shine said. He says, if we give them half of our business, they'll own us and they will dictate what we're going to do. I think that's kind of the same situation that we have here. They got to keep it clean and pure. Now, let's continue on. Jack, read those verses 4 to 5.
Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and frightened them from building, and bribed advisors against them to frustrate their advice all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia.
Okay, so now their real intentions come forward. You're not going to let us help you, which was really going to be sabotage. We're going to block you from being able to do what you want to do. Okay, this is an interesting thing in chapter 4 of Ezra. Okay, if we were going to read Ezra chronologically, you would read the first 5 or 6 verses, and then you'd skip the rest of it and you'd finish with verse 24. That is chronologically what happens. In between there is a letter that is written. Okay, I'm going to show you some pieces of that. The letter is to warn the king that these people are building in Jerusalem again. The problem is the letter is sent to King Artaxerxes. So let's take a look real quick here. This is just some portions of the letter that's written. We're in verse 11 to 13 in chapter 4. Okay, this is actually written in Aramaic as well. It had to be translated by the scribe to present here. Jack, go ahead and read those verses there.
This is a copy of the letter which they sent to him. To King Artaxerxes, your servants, the men of the region beyond the Euphrates River, and now let it be known to the king that the Jews who came up from you have come to us at Jerusalem. They are rebuilding the rebellious and evil city and are finishing the walls and repairing the foundations. Now let it be known to the king that if that city is rebuilt and the walls are finished, they will not pay tribute, custom tax, or toll, and it will be detrimental to the revenue of the kings.
Aren't these just great citizens? We're just here to warn you that these people are doing this, and if they do this successfully, they're probably not going to pay taxes to you. They're probably not going to give tributes to you. Okay? I'm going to skip ahead a slide. Here's the thing. The letter is addressed to Artaxerxes, who reigned in 465 to 435. Now, when was the temple finished? 516 BC. So this letter is written 50 years after the temple has actually been completed. Now, why would and this is one of the rabbit holes I went down. Why would Ezra do that? Why are you providing a letter in the middle of this chapter? Okay, why are you providing this 50-year-old letter in the middle there that kind of disrupts the chronological order of things? Good answer. I don't know why either. Okay, but I think it's to show an example of the ongoing opposition that they encountered. Now, also take a look at, it says they are rebuilding the rebellious and evil city. This isn't about the temple. This is about the city being rebuilt. Okay, and that's 50 years later. Okay, so these Samaritan do-gooders are showing their real colors now of what they really want. They really just want to stop progress. But don't get confused by this letter because it's not in chronological order. And the king does respond. Jack, let's read those verses.
Now issue a decree to make those men stop work so that this city will not be rebuilt until a decree is issued by me. And we beware of being negligent in carrying out this matter. Why should there be great damage to the detriment of the kings? Then as soon as the copy of King Artaxerxes' decree was read before Rahum and Shimshai, the scribe, and their colleagues, they went in a hurry to Jerusalem, to the Jews, and stopped them by military force.
Okay, again, this is 50 years later. This is not the temple. Okay, so wrap your head around that for a minute. But the people, the Samaritans that are there, I read a story this week about this couple that bought a house in California, and the person who sold it to them and took their money went back in and changed the locks and moved back into his own house, his old house. It's been going on for 3 years. They're like squatters, okay? And this is a problem. Squatters have more rights than the real owners. And that's what I thought about when I said, these people are squatters in the land. And they don't like the fact that you're coming back here rebuilding the temple, okay? Nothing's changed. Nothing has changed. So, I already showed you that timeline. Again, the temple will be complete before the end of this lesson today in 516. Okay. So we see how the king responds. And again, we'll get into that in a little more detail, but I want you to know as we go through, and the fact that we're not stopping to study those verses real close, that's why we're not, is because the letter doesn't pertain to that time.
Yeah, most of this is really about power. They
Yeah.
knew that the temple was there, the temple was completed, but they also knew that the wall wasn't done. And they knew that the temple could be attacked at any minute unless they ultimately rebuilt the wall. So it's a little bit about power. Tattenai then later on writes another letter.
And we're going to see that too.
And he's the governor. And so to a certain extent, and then later on, Sanballat and Tobiah resist the building of the wall. And it's all about power because they were all governors. Tattenai is a governor, Sanballat's a governor, Tobiah is a governor.
That's right.
And they have control of these territories and they're going to lose some control.
Yeah, that's it's interesting, but it is about power. We're gonna see that, and you're gonna see some real power here in a little bit. And then chapter 4 concludes with verse 24. Did I give you that, Jack?
Yes. Then work on the house of God in Jerusalem was discontinued, and it was stopped until the 2nd year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia.
Okay, so they are successful in stopping them from building the temple for a while. A period of about 16 years goes by where they have done nothing on the temple. So we had all that joy building the altar again, and all that joy celebrating the cornerstone being placed, and then basically it stops for 16 years, and it just sits there. Now, you think they're discouraged? Probably, I would think so. A 16-year delay would be a problem. Let's move into chapter 5. Jack, you want to read the first verses there, 1 and 2 in chapter 5?
When the prophets, Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel who was over them, then Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Jeshua the son of Jozadak rose up and began to rebuild the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. And the prophets of God were with them, supporting them.
So if you're looking for encouragement, nothing's better than having the prophets of God come and visit you, isn't it? And by the way, I'm so thankful that Jack does all the reading because those names are a nightmare. He does a great job. And I question nothing when it comes to his pronunciations of some of these names. Yeah, so encouragement, that is a huge thing for them. They've stalled 16 years, and all of a sudden the prophets show up. Then in Haggai, we see some of that encouragement. Jack, you want to read that?
This is what the Lord of armies says. This people says, the time has not come, the time for the house of the Lord to be rebuilt.
Hang on just a second there. Can't you just see the people? You're getting questioned, why aren't we making progress on the temple? Well, the time's not right. You think that's the case? I think they're just scared. Go ahead, Jack.
Then the word of the Lord came by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for your relatives to live in your paneled houses while this house remains desolate?
Okay, hang on a second. Is that encouragement? It's a form of encouragement. It's exhortation. It's a swift kick in the pants is what it is. Go ahead and finish that up, Jack.
The Lord of armies says this, consider your ways. Go up to the mountains, bring wood, and rebuild the temple, that I may be pleased with it and be honored, says the Lord. You start an ambitious project, but behold, it comes to little. When you bring it home, I blow it away. Why, declares the Lord of heaven's armies? It is because of my house, which remains desolate, while each of you runs to his own house.
That's God getting after you. Okay, my house is still in ruins. It's a shambles, and yet you're living in your houses that you've been building for the last 16 years. You're fine, but you've neglected the house of the Lord. So this is an encouragement, a rebuke, a swift kick in the pants. It's whatever you want to call it, but God is not messing around. I think he's highly upset with them. So often when we talk about encouragement, sometimes it does take a swift kick in the pants. Len, you coached sports for a long time. Sometimes you encourage, and sometimes you kick in the pants. And sometimes usually it's both. Would you agree with that?
I think so. I think you've got to approach it from a variety of perspectives, depending upon the players involved and what they need. You have to understand your players first. And God certainly.
No, I think God understands who the players are here. Think about this. Think about the joy and the energy that they started off with. They come out of exile, and within 7 months, you've got this huge altar rebuilt. Not only rebuilt, but rebuilt on the exact foundations that it was before. And then in year 2, the second month, you lay the cornerstone for it. Great enthusiasm, lots of joy. People are excited about it. And now 16 years goes by, you've done nothing except build your own house. I could see where God going to get a little ticked off about that. I don't know if that's a scriptural ticked off, but
John, this is also going to be a test.
Yeah.
It's a test whether or not you're going to remain in fear, or you're going to follow God. And we'll see what.
Yeah, you're going to see that here in a little bit. So God's people, the citizens of Jerusalem, they told them it wasn't time, and Haggai has a different message for them. Why do you think? Was it just the Samaritans that scared them away? 16 years. Was it just that? Was it that single threat? What else could it have been? Let's keep in mind that the land has laid desolate for 70 years. So we can only imagine what it looks like there. We can also imagine how hard the work was. They also didn't have a lot of money. It also wasn't going to look like Solomon's temple when they were done. And in another part of Haggai, it talks about the crop failures. Therefore, because of you, the sky has withheld its dew, and the earth has withheld its produce. So their inactivity is making the land worse. And then you've got hostile enemies that are resisting the work. And I don't know if this is true or not, but you think there was a portion of them that maybe looked back in some fondness of how they had it in Babylon? Probably. It probably wasn't a lot requested of you. So it's sometimes hard to get our attention. Why is it so hard for God to get our attention sometimes?
We're self-centered and we want our own way.
That's a good answer. Glenn?
We can get consumed with doubt and despair. over
Yeah,
things like that.
it's real easy to do that, isn't it? Yeah, I remember when my brother, we moved him from Wisconsin, the booming metropolis of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, down to the booming metropolis of Henryville, Indiana. And he's got like a 30-foot truck with all his stuff in there. And the day he pulled in, we had a snowstorm that had a foot of snow. So here is my brother and his wife, my other brother and his wife, me and Patsy, And we're unloading this 25-foot truck in the snow with all his furniture, everything. His whole life is in this truck. And I remember very specifically, we got all the stuff out of the back of the truck, beds, couches, kitchen stuff, all that stuff in there. We get to the back half of the truck, and I kid you not, it is nothing but boxes of books. You know how heavy boxes of books are? And I'll tell you right now, if it wasn't for Patsy, we would never finish that job that day. She kept honest, and my brothers will tell you the same story. She kept telling us, listen, the weather's not going to be better tomorrow. And you're going to have to return the truck tomorrow. We need to get their lives set up tonight so they can live in this house. Coach Patsy was really getting on us. And we did finish the job. Patsy's probably laughing right now. She's watching this. But she's the only reason we finished that job is because of that kick in the pants that we got from her. It wasn't great encouragement as much as just reality. Hey, we got to get this going. 3 Irishmen, guess what we were ready for? But again and again, Patsy kept reminding us and kept pushing us, and we actually did get it done. So God is providing them with the push that they need. Let's move on here, Jack. So now, who's Tatnai? Tatnai is the governor of the area. Okay, we're in chapter 5, and they sent the same people send a report to him. Jack, go ahead and read verses 7 to 8, and then let's start with 7 and 8.
They sent the report to him, in which it was written as follows: To Darius the king, all peace. May it be known to the king that we have gone to the province of Judah, to the house of the great God, which is being built with large stones and beams are being laid in the walls. And this work is being performed with great care and is succeeding in their hands.
Okay, so first thing we hear from this letter, okay, what is Tatnai? First of all, what's Tatnai going to do here? He's going to send a letter to Darius, who's now the king that came after Cyrus. Says, hey, can you check into this and see if Cyrus really did decree that they could do this? Okay. And he says right in there, they're succeeding in their hands. So they are now making progress. After Haggai shows up, they're making progress. Jack, let's continue with 10 to 13.
We also asked them their names so as to inform you in order that we might write down the names of the men who were in charge. So they answered us as follows, saying, we are the servants of the God of heaven and earth, and are rebuilding the temple that was built many years ago, which a great king of Israel built and finished. But because our fathers provoked the God of heaven to wrath, he handed them over to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the Chaldean, who destroyed this temple and deported the people to Babylon. However, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree to rebuild this house of God.
Looks like I missed a slide in there. Yeah, the slide I forgot to put in there was verses 3 to 5. Jack, do I have that on your script there?
Yes.
Let's back up a little bit. Read verses 3 to 5 because it sets the context in here.
At that time, Tatnai, the governor of the province beyond the Euphrates River, and Shethar-Bozenai, even I have trouble saying, Shethar-Bozenai and their colleagues came to them and spoke to them as follows: who issued a decree to rebuild this temple and to finish this structure? Then we told them accordingly what the names of the men were who were reconstructing this building. But the eye of their God was on the elders of the Jews, and they did not stop them until the report could reach Darius, and then the decree concerning it could be sent back.
Okay, so what I skipped, and I missed a slide somewhere. So Tatnai is the governor of the region, and now the Samaritans are approaching him. Okay, this is in real time. Okay, this isn't a 50-year off letter. This is in real time. Okay, so and they spoke to him, and we want to know who issued this decree. So Tatnai, to his credit, basically takes their statement and says, I'm going to go ahead and research this And that's what we saw in verses 7 through 13. Now, one of the things I thought was a little bit refreshing. First of all, remember now Darius is the king of Babylon, not Cyrus. Okay. We hope they have good records because that's where they're going to have to rely on because Cyrus is gone. But they also answered us, we are the servants of God of heaven and earth and are rebuilding the temple that was built many years ago, which a great king of Israel built and finished. Then it says, but because our fathers provoked the God of heaven to wrath, he handed them over to Nebuchadnezzar. This is a great moment of clarity. They're not blaming anybody, are they? They're taking responsibility for their situation. Here's how we got there. We came back with the decree from Cyrus, and that's why we're building the temple. That's their story, and they're sticking to it. Okay. Some brutal honesty from them. They were handed over, and he destroyed the temple. So they're letting Tatnai know exactly what happened. Jack, let's go ahead and, well, let me ask you something before we go on. How would you compare that with today? So they're owning up, they're telling the story, they're telling the truth, they're owning up to their misdeeds that caused them to go into exile, and they're telling the whole thing to Tatnai. How would that go down if it were someone today repeating a story from 70 years ago?
I would start with Donald Trump.
It would start with Donald Trump. Probably not far off.
Actually, maybe Joe Biden when he entered the Senate.
It would probably be, go ahead, Len.
I think what's interesting about this is that they have a continuous heart of repentance. And so they have been repentant. And really over that 20 years, you have to ask yourself a question, well, what were they doing there? What was going on there? I think that was a test. But what's interesting is that Tatnai, from Tatnai's perspective, his sending that letter was a mistake. Simply because you're going to see what he does.
We're going to find that out shortly.
In his sovereignty. And it was, I think, in fact, as a result of it, of their repentance, God also rewarded them. So we're going to see this happen. And I do think it's important for us to realize that God is ultimately sovereign, not Joe Biden, not anybody
That's
in
right.
the United States. And so for us,
That's right.
it's important for us to, as Spurgeon talked about, it's important, first of all, for revival to occur, for individuals to get their acts together.
That's right.
And Kyle's message was good today. It's important for us to engage in spiritual disciplines so that we start to get our own act together before we can influence the larger society. So I think that the Israelites getting their act together would also ultimately influence the rest of society.
That's a good thing. And today, I don't know if we would see the same resolve. I don't know if you'd see the straightforward story given like that.
When I say they had a moment of clarity, I think if we had a moment of clarity as a nation, we would declare that all of the loss of our whole culture is because we've forsaken God.
Exactly.
That was their clarity.
Exactly.
They had forsaken God, and this is what's gotten us here.
We also live in a culture that we blame someone else every time for the problems I have. Well, the reason I'm an alcoholic is because my father was. Victimology, great word. Yeah, exactly. And we blame everybody all the time. But here, they're telling the story to Tatnai, who's going to write this letter. And evidently, they've dictated to him very accurately. Jack, let's go on to verses 14 to 17.
Also, the gold and silver utensils of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem and brought them to the temple of Babylon, King Cyrus took them from the temple of Babylon, and they were given to one whose name was Sheshbazzar, whom he had appointed governor. And he said to him, "Take these utensils, go and deposit them in the temple in Jerusalem, and have the house of God rebuilt in its place." Then that Sheshbazzar came and laid the foundations of the house of God in Jerusalem, and from then until now it has been under construction, and it is not yet completed. And now, if it pleases the king, let a search be conducted in the king's treasure house, which is there in Babylon, as to whether a decree was issued by King Cyrus to rebuild this house of God in Jerusalem, and let the king send to us his decision concerning this matter.
And they're pretty confident telling this story. They're pretty confident that they're going to get the answer that they really want to have. But in this day and age, with the people that are in charge, there's no guarantee of that. The fact that the letter got written with such specificity and all those details they provided are in there is pretty much a miracle almost in itself. The Tatnai would be that accurate. Let's move on, Jack. We're going to go in chapter 6 now. Go ahead and read verses 1 to 5.
Then King Darius issued a decree, and a search was conducted in the archives where the treasures were stored in Babylon. And in Ecbatana, in the fortress which is in the province of Media, a scroll was found, and the following was written on it.
Now think about that. Thank goodness for the record keeping of the kings of Babylon. They found the scroll. That's remarkable in itself. That's another miracle. Go ahead, Jack.
Memorandum. In the first year of King Cyrus, Cyrus the king issued a decree concerning the house of God in Jerusalem. Let the temple, the place where sacrifices are offered, be rebuilt, and let its foundations be repaired, its height being 60 cubits and its width 60 cubits, with 3 layers of large stones and 1 layer of timber, and the cost is to be paid from the royal treasury. Also, the gold and silver utensils of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem and brought to Babylon, are to be returned and brought to their places in the temple in Jerusalem, and you shall put them in the house of God.
So this is great news. Here you go. They find the scroll. That's miracle number 1, but it indicates there must have been some diligence in finding that in the first place, right? It required a search. What are the Jews doing in the meantime? They're building the temple. They're back at it. You know, I think in this day and age, we got to remind ourselves, this guy didn't send a text message. He didn't send an email. He sends a letter. How far away is Babylon from Jerusalem? 800 miles, Dan? About 800 miles. Okay. It took a while for the letter to get there. Okay. It took a while for the search to find the scroll, and it took a while to get that letter response back to them. They're probably making pretty good progress on the temple by the time they actually get this decree. And not only did Cyrus give permission for the temple, what else does he say? Fund the work from the royal treasury. You think Ted and I wanted to hear that? Yeah. So not only do they have permission, there's one other little thing in here. You notice the size? If they built it to that size, it would have been bigger than Solomon's temple. So what Cyrus is really saying is you can go as big as this. He's not commanding them to build it that big. He's saying, but you could build it as big as you wanted up to those measurements. But it is actually, those measurements are different. If you look up in the Old Testament, you look up the dimensions of Solomon's temple, they're much smaller than 60 by 60. Okay. So that's pretty interesting. So Tatnai's got to be thinking to himself, my goodness, not only were they right, but now I got to fund it. Jack, let's go on and read verses 6 to 8.
Now, as for you, Tatnai, governor of the province beyond the Euphrates River, Shethar-Bazanai and your colleagues,
That's easy for you to say.
the officials of the provinces beyond the river, stay away from there. Leave that work on the house of God alone. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews rebuild that house of God on its site. Furthermore, I issue a decree concerning what you are to do for these elders of Judah in the rebuilding of that house of God. The full cost is to be paid to those people from the royal treasury out of the taxes of the provinces beyond the Euphrates River, and that without interruption.
Think about that for a second. All right. Not only are we going to let them build this, and not only can they build it bigger if they wanted to, but you're paying for everything. And I mean everything. And it's going to come out of the taxes.
If this were a movie, we'd be clapping.
Oh, amen. Can you imagine that? I'm going to build a new house and Joe Biden's going to pay for it out of taxes. Yeah.
Taxes of the provinces beyond the Euphrates. It's not even the Jews.
That's
that are
right.
Living there, they're not their own.
That's
tax.
right. It was probably a special billionaires tax or something they were going to use the money from. So, yeah, don't worry about it. All you poor people, don't worry about it. The taxes will take care of everything. So it's a great message. Let's go on. Because it gets even better. Verses 9 to 12, Jack.
And whatever is needed, bulls, rams, and lambs for burnt offerings to the God of heaven, and wheat, salt, wine, and anointing oil, as the priests in Jerusalem order, it is to be given to them daily without fail, so that they may offer acceptable sacrifices to God, to the God of heaven, and pray for the lives of the king and his sons. And I issue a decree that any person who violates this decree,
Now listen to this. Let's start there again, Jack.
and I
Listen
issue,
closely.
and I issue a decree that any person who violates this decree, a timber shall be pulled out of his house, and he shall be impaled on it, and his house shall be turned into a refuse heap on account of this. May the God who has caused his name to dwell there overthrow any king or people who attempts to change it, so as to destroy that house of God in Jerusalem. I, Darius, have issued this decree. It is to be carried out with all diligence.
All right. So first of all, this is no longer Cyrus's decree. Okay. This is Darius speaking now. And think about this. I issue this decree that anyone who violates the decree, a timber, what is it saying? A timber should be pulled out of their house. What are they really saying? We're going to knock your house down. Okay. And if that's not enough, and don't you think it ought to be? They're going to impale you on that timber if you get in the way. You know, when we were in Israel with Dan and Meg a few years back. I remember when we were in Jerusalem, and Dan had to park a ways away because he dropped us off. I made him go park the car. So we're all walking back to the car, and we're walking by this neighborhood that is literally across the street from the temple. And we're walking by several places, and there's just a slab. There's no house. So in the middle of all these houses, there would be just a slab. And I asked Dan, I said, what the heck is going on with the slabs here? He said, well, if you get caught, if a terrorist is caught in Israel, they take his family, they take their home, and they implode it. And then they kick the family out of Israel back to their whatever their home country was. Did I get that right, Dan? Close enough. They tear down the house. Now they stop just short of impaling people on the timbers used on it, but it's not a whole lot different than what we're seeing here. I tell you, they got a long memory, and Darius has really upped the ante on Cyrus's decree, hasn't he? And whatever's needed, bulls, rams, lambs, burnt offerings, everything, we're going to take care of it. And don't anybody get in the way of it. He calls it the house of God in Jerusalem. Is Darius a believer? He's not. Ken.
God is obviously controlling these non-believers to the benefit of the Jews, but you got to wonder, is this some remnant of Daniel's influence over that regime?
Oh, yeah.
They understand
Absolutely.
what he did and how he
Absolutely.
prophesied.
We should do a lesson on that.
Yeah.
And we will. What do you think Tadnai is thinking as he's reading this? You think this was the outcome he was looking for or expecting? I think at best he was hoping that they wouldn't find any decree and he could just make all this go away. But he doesn't find that. He finds that not only is a decree right, but Darius doubles down on the decree. Yeah.
Don't you think that this is probably not the first time that Darius has heard about this? And he's also saying,
Yeah.
look, I'm sick and tired of this. I'm going to make a ruling, and this is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're not going to talk about this again.
Yeah, that's right.
This is it. You're going to put it to bed. We're not going to talk about it again. So I can only imagine what Tadnai is thinking at this point. I bet he's thinking, I better not drop the ball on this one, or it could be me being impaled. Dan,
Is this before Esther or after Esther? This time right here.
This is prior to Esther,
Okay.
because the next king is Xerxes,
Okay,
and it happens under Xerxes.
yeah, because this leads into what happens in Esther.
yeah, that's true.
That's right.
Terry.
It seems to me like Daniel might actually also be, King Darius might be conferring with Daniel.
Oh, he could be.
in all of this. as well.
Absolutely. There's no doubt that Daniel had a tremendous influence on the leaders there, right? I mean, he was highly respected himself. I'm sure he was probably having those conversations. Jack, let's go ahead and do 14 to 18.
And they finished building following the command of the God of Israel and the decree of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. Now this temple was completed on the 3rd day of the month of Adar. It was the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. And the sons of Israel, the priests, the Levites, and the rest of the exiles celebrated the dedication of this house of God with joy. They offered for the dedication of this temple of God 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 lambs, and as a sin offering for all Israel, 12 male goats, corresponding to the number of the tribes of Israel. Then they appointed the priests to their division and the Levites in their sections for the service of God in Jerusalem, as it is written in the book of Moses.
Now, that sounds like a lot of sacrificing, doesn't it? There was, what do they say here, Jack? They offered a dedication of temple, 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 lambs, and a sin offering for all 12 male goats again. Anybody remember how many animals were sacrificed in Solomon's temple? 142,000. So this is a much smaller enterprise than it was in Solomon's day, but they have great joy again. Great joy. You know, given the relative wealth of Israel in the days of the first temple, the second temple must seem like you're downsizing your home or something, right? But yet they have great joy in there. Jack, let's go ahead and do 19 to 22.
The exiles held the Passover on the 14th of the first month. For the priests and the Levites had purified themselves together. All of them were pure. Then they slaughtered the Passover lambs for all the exiles, both for their brothers, the priests, and for themselves. And the sons of Israel who returned from exile, and all those who had separated themselves from the impurity of the nations of the land to join them, to seek the Lord God of Israel, ate the Passover. And they held the feast of unleavened bread for 7 days with joy, because the Lord had made them happy and had turned the heart of the king of Assyria toward them to encourage them in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel.
That's pretty amazing. They returned from exile, and all those who had separated themselves in impurity of the nations of the land to join them and seek the Lord of God of Israel. They ate the Passover. They had 7 days with joy. You ever pray for joy? Be honest. Do you ever pray for joy? Len, you do? I gotta be honest. I don't always. You know what? And there's a big difference. Sometimes you pray for happiness. Happiness ain't joy. What's the difference between happiness and joy?
Situational joy is from God.
It's from God. Absolutely. And it made them happy because the Lord had made them happy. Are you sitting around waiting for God to make you happy? To me, it's an important little line there. I think the Jews are fickle people. They're happy when God makes them happy. They're joyful when their circumstances are right, and not so much when things aren't going exactly their way. You know, when I first became a Christian and started going to this class, I I was mentored initially by Alvin. And we would go to lunches together and Alvin would pray in a way that I was completely unfamiliar with. I had never prayed for the things that Alvin prayed for. Simple things. Pray for desire. The first day, pray for desire. That God would give you a desire to read his word, love his word, and dwell in his word. Desire. I'd never prayed that before. Now, I'd only been a Christian a short time, but this is why it's important to come along some mature Christians to get this kind of advice. Do you pray for joy? I bet Alvin does. He also scared the heck out of me one time when we were talking about the book of Job. It opens up with, if he considered my servant Job, and Alvin goes, what if Satan's up in heaven right now talking about you? And God says, have you considered my servant John? Yee. No, I hadn't thought about that. Heads up, if you're going to pray with Alvin, you better be ready.
I think he did about 1 o'clock.
Yeah, you did. I wanted to show you this. When we were in Israel, we went to the Dead Sea Scrolls exhibit. And is that right, Dan? This is right by there. And if you ever get a chance to go to the Dead Sea Scrolls exhibit, you have to do it. The centerpiece is the full intact scroll of the book of Isaiah. It's really amazing. I got some pictures. You're not supposed to take pictures in there. I did. But this is a scale model. That's roughly, I'm going to guess, Dan, about 100 yards, maybe a little bigger. Bigger than that. But it's a scale replica of the city of Jerusalem and the temple. This is their depiction of what Zerubbabel's temple looked like when they were done. Okay. And that's a little closer. Now the altar, Dan and I were talking about this. The altar probably would have been behind this wall somewhere, and we can't see it from this view. I should have turned around the other way and tried to get a picture of it. But that's what it would have looked like. And this is much smaller than Solomon's temple. That's quite a feat there, the Temple Mount. And we were talking also over here where these columns are and stuff, that's where Jesus and the disciples probably would have met and would have been doing some teachings, is right in there. It really is a neat exhibit to see something like this, because you can't, I've complained before when you try to find pictures when you're doing a lesson, for PowerPoint slides, it's just garbage. But when I did a search for Zerubbabel's temple, these pictures came up. Now, these are my pictures, but someone else has taken them and posted it on it. So that's probably a pretty good depiction of what it looks like. And so that closes us in chapter 6. We've gone from them meeting resistance. We've learned about the Samaritans were in that land, that they were opposition to them, but God brought his prophets to them to encourage them and kick them in the pants when they needed it. And ultimately are able to finish the temple in 516 BC. Okay. Any questions before we move on? All right, we'll be back at it next week.